And now Chapter 10, the nature of fruitive activity. The Supreme Personality of Godhead said, "Taking full shelter in me, with the mind carefully fixed in the devotional service of the Lord, as spoken by me, one should live without personal desire, and practice the social and occupational system called varnashram. A purified soul should see that because the conditioned souls who are dedicated to sense gratification have falsely accepted the objects of sense pleasure as truth, all of their endeavors are doomed to failure. One who is sleeping may see many objects of sense gratification in a dream, but such pleasurable things are merely creations of the mind, and are thus ultimately useless. Similarly, the living entity who is asleep to his spiritual identity also sees many sense objects, but these innumerable objects of temporary gratification are creations of the Lord's illusory potency and have no permanent existence. One who meditates upon them, impelled by the senses, uselessly engages his intelligence. One who has fixed me within his mind as the goal of life should give up activities based on sense gratification, and should instead execute work governed by the regulative principles for advancement. When, however, one is fully engaged in searching out the ultimate truth of the soul, one should not accept the scriptural injunctions governing fruitive activities. One who has accepted me as the supreme goal of life should strictly observe the scriptural injunctions forbidding sinful activities, and, as far as possible, should execute the injunctions prescribing minor regulative duties such as cleanliness. Ultimately, however, one should approach a bona fide spiritual master who is as full in knowledge of me as I am, who is peaceful, and who, by spiritual elevation, is not different from me. The servant or disciple of the spiritual master should be free from false prestige, never considering himself to be the doer. He should be active and never lazy, and should give up all sense of proprietorship over the objects of the senses, including his wife, children, home, and society. He should be endowed with feelings of loving friendship toward the spiritual master, and should never become deviated or bewildered. The servant or disciple should always desire advancement in spiritual understanding, should not envy anyone, and should always avoid useless conversation. One should see one's real self-interest in life in all circumstances, and should therefore remain detached from wife, children, home, land, relatives, friends, wealth, and so on. Just as fire, which burns and illuminates, is different from firewood, which is to be burned to give illumination, similarly, the seer within the body, the self-enlightened spirit soul, is different from the material body, which is to be illuminated by consciousness. Thus the spirit soul and the body possess different characteristics and are separate entities. Just as fire may appear differently as dormant, manifest, weak, brilliant, and so on, according to the condition of the fuel, Similarly, the spirit soul enters a material body and accepts particular bodily characteristics. The subtle and gross material bodies are created by the material modes of nature, which expand from the potency of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Material existence occurs when the living entity falsely accepts the qualities of the gross and subtle bodies as being his own factual nature. This illusory state, however, can be destroyed by real knowledge. Therefore, by the cultivation of knowledge, one should approach the Supreme Personality of Godhead within oneself. By understanding the Lord's pure, transcendental existence, one should gradually give up the false vision of the material world as independent reality. The spiritual master can be compared to the lower kindling stick, the disciple to the upper kindling stick, and the instruction given by the Guru to the third stick placed in between. The transcendental knowledge communicated from Guru to disciple is compared to the fire arising from the contact of these, which burns the darkness of ignorance to ashes, bringing great happiness both to Guru and disciple. By submissively hearing from an expert spiritual master, the expert disciple develops pure knowledge, which repels the onslaught of material illusion arising from the three modes of material nature. Finally, this pure knowledge itself ceases just as fire ceases when the stock of fuel has been consumed. My dear Uddhava, I have thus explained to you perfect knowledge. There are philosophers, however, who challenge my conclusion. They state that the natural position of the living entity is to engage in fruitive activities, and they see him as the enjoyer of the happiness and unhappiness that accrue from his own work. According to this materialistic philosophy, the world, time, the revealed scriptures, and the self are all variegated and eternal, existing as a perpetual flow of transformations. Knowledge, moreover, cannot be one or eternal, because it arises from the different and changing forms of objects. Thus, knowledge itself is always subject to change. Even if you accept such a philosophy, my dear Uddhava, there will still be perpetual birth, death, old age, and disease, since all living entities must accept a material body subject to the influence of time.